President Bola Tinubu has called for an end to Israeli aggression in Gaza while warning that empty condemnations are not enough to end the conflict in Palestine, which he says has persisted for far too long. President Tinubu made this argument at the extraordinary Arab-Islamic summit convened to address the current situation in the Middle East. He expressed deep concern over the humanitarian conditions in Gaza. The one-day summit was a follow-up to the Riyadh summit of 2023 and was attended by heads of state and government from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the League of Arab States. Professor Femi Otubanjo joins us from the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs to discuss the president's call for a two-state solution to the Middle East crisis and how feasible that is, given Israel's new commitment to root out Hamas and other terror-allied group post-October 7 attack. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's start, with your thoughts on the president's call for an end to Israeli aggression in Gaza and, of course, for the realization of the two-state solution.
Well, I would say it's a routine call. Everybody's been calling for an end to Israeli aggression. It is gratifying that Nigeria has joined its voice on a large scale, on a global scale. Obviously, the destruction in Israel and the deprivations cannot be accepted and cannot continue. We hope that Israel would listen, because the ball is in Israel's court, basically. Hamas also has to agree to some peace deal. There's been some frustration with the Hamas about rejecting the peace deal, up to the point that Qatar has decided to withdraw its participation in the peace deal, and countries like the US are calling for Palestinian representatives to be sent away from Doha, since the whole purpose of their staying in Doha is to encourage them to make peace with Israel. On the two-state solution, that has been around for a very long time. In fact, the beginning of the Israeli crisis was the two-state solution. 1917, the Balfour Declaration. 1937, the Peel Declaration. And of course, in 1947, the UN Declaration of a two-state, a proposal to set up two states in Palestine, one for the Jews and one for the Arabs. Ironically, the Arabs were the ones who rejected it and consistently rejected the two-state solutions. But gradually, it became fashionable. It was suggested during the period of the PLO that the two-state solution is the best way forward. The PLO initially rejected the idea under Arafat, suggesting that there should only be one state in the region. But later on, by 1988, it had succumbed to the idea and was ready to accept a two-state solution. In 1993-94, there was what we call the Oslo Accords, which proposed a two-state solution. And in 2003, you had the peace, the United States proposal, a proposal led by the US for a Palestinian state. The problem now is that Israel has suddenly become weary of accepting the solution, the two-state solution, for very many reasons. One is that Israeli settlements have taken over most of the land that would have been part of the Palestinian state. Maybe almost 50 years of occupation, and I'm not sure they know how to get out of that. Then there's the danger that they have always indicated of having a sovereign Arab state beside them, given the danger that that state could be taken over by radical elements like Hamas and Hezbollah. That has been the problem. When Gaza was under the PLO, it was taken over gradually by Hamas. Now Lebanon has been virtually occupied by Hezbollah, and Israel is worried that its survival might not be guaranteed if a state is created nearby. There's also the the problem that the Arabs themselves have not renounced the Hezbollah, militant groups like Hezbollah and Hamas have not renounced their commitment to the destruction of Israel. So if you have the destruction of Israel as a central agenda of these radical groups, how can you now succumb to the idea of the two-state solution? So there are issues to be cleared on both sides. You need to get Hamas and the radical group, the Arabs, to accept the idea of Israel, that Israel must survive. Israel must have a guarantee of survival. Israel must have that guarantee maybe from the United Nations. Maybe one solution would be for Israel to security to be guaranteed by the U.S., or maybe Israel actually to be a member of NATO, so that there will be a mutual defense agreement with other NATO members, which will guarantee some safety for Israel. But the reality, of course, is that the situation has become more complicated than it was before. But it is, by any stretch of the imagination, the best solution to the crisis.
Now, Professor, this crisis actually makes me wonder how relevant the United Nations really is at this point, saying that it's quite powerless in finding a solution to the crisis in the Middle East, or even getting both sides to the negotiation table. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the United States and the United Nations have been very active on the matter of the Middle East. If you go into their books, they have hundreds of resolutions. But the United Nations is not a supranational organization. It's an international organization. It does not have any power over and above what the states allow it to apply. But more critically is the role of the major powers, particularly the veto powers in the Security Council. Unless there is agreement, unanimity amongst them, nothing can happen. Most of the time, United Nations resolutions are vetoed by the United States, by UK and France. And therefore, in as much as the UN prefers to have peace in the region, support the two-state solution, has always called for Israeli withdrawal from occupied territories, nothing has been achieved, because every attempt to impose sanctions on Israel have been frustrated by the veto wielding powers. So it is not a United Nations failure. Indeed, it is the United States, the United Nations has to be applauded for keeping it on the boiler all the time. It's a major element of its operations. It's one of the biggest elements of its agenda to see a solution in the Middle East. Because the problem of the Middle East is the problem of the world. It has held the world back for more than 70 years. And everybody is anxious to get out of it. And maybe the two-state solution somehow will be the answer to that problem.
Now, I'm wondering what impact, if any, a Trump presidency is likely to have on this crisis. Do you think he'll be able to maybe get a ceasefire when he gets into office?
Well, I hope he would be. The instinct that one has about Trump, of course, is that he will be more pro-Israel. Don't remember that he was the first to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, in spite of opposition and hesitancy from the rest of the world. Our hope is that in his forceful character, his special relationship with Netanyahu and others can bring a change in the trajectory of a resolution of the problem. Again, I'm not sure what influence it will have on Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran if you continue to be hostile to Iran, that sponsors all these other what they call axis of resistance. It might not be as easy as Trump himself makes it look. Trump thinks that he can solve the problem by just calling up Netanyahu, calling up this and that. That's so simplistic. But the expectation and the hope and the prayer really is that Trump should make a difference so that this problem can begin to be resolved and the world can be saved from the carnage and the devastation of war in that region.
Now, some Analysts have described the two-state solution as stillborn. Some say it is dead and buried, an idea that cannot be revived, considering the exponential growth of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Some also say that partitioning Israel and Palestine will be bloodier than India and Pakistan. What are your thoughts on this?
It has already been very bloody. I mean, 40-something thousand people have been killed in Gaza. Many thousands were killed during all the wars, the Yom Kippur War, the 1967 war. There's been blood all over the place. But is there any alternative? I think the idea is to try to look at the obstacles and see what can be achieved through sacrifices. The settlements constitute a major element, a major challenge. But there are settlements anyway, and there will always be a solution. Once the big powers are ready to guarantee it, what is more critical to the Israelis is the security of Israel. The Arabs have to work on those states that are still resisting the existence of Israel to openly declare that Israel has a right to survive. It has a right to existence. If they don't do that, if they don't abandon this resolution to destroy Israel, then you cannot begin to talk. But those things can be done diplomatically. And I hope that Israel will be ready to make concessions once its security is guaranteed. And that is where we should be looking at, the guarantee of Israel's survival. But it must be preceded by a renunciation of the commitment to her destruction by those who want to destroy her. If you don't have that, Israel will not have the psychological disposition to want to negotiate for a two-state solution. But by any stretch of the imagination, there is no alternative to the two-state solution.
Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says a sovereign Palestinian state poses an existential danger to Israel. He has also vowed not to compromise on full Israeli security control west of Jordan. He says he's going to eradicate Hamas and all other terror-affiliated groups in the region. So in this kind of situation, how do you bring him to the negotiation table? And especially with some other people saying that Palestine does not even exist, how do you now bring such people to the negotiation table?
Yeah, in any country there are extremes, there are extreme views, extreme perspectives. Netanyahu belongs to the right, not necessarily the far right. There are still people further right who say all kinds of things that appear to be crazy. But in diplomacy, like in that James Bond film, you never say never. Everything is about negotiation. And the point I made it that the key point is the survival, the security of Israel. That has to be guaranteed. And it can be guaranteed by maybe the United States aligning itself with Israel as its protector. Israel joining NATO and entering into a common defense, mutual defense agreement, which will mean that anybody who attacks Israel will be attacking NATO, and so on. But first, there must be a renunciation of the commitment, of the agenda of destroying Israel. You need all that to take place before the hardcore views, the hard views that are still circulating will be weakened. Gradually, and Israel and Netanyahu is not the only perspective in Israel. There are many people who are on the other side who believe that peace must be made with the Arabs for Israel to enjoy its own sovereignty. So those voices can take over the place and help to negotiate a different kind of peace. Netanyahu is not the only voice in Israel. And I hope that those voices of reason will prevail in the long run, if not now.
Professor Femi Otubanjo of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, thank you so much for joining us on Twostate.